On this episode of Eager to Know, we are going back to 2020 where I speak with artist Darren Jones. This is back in Chicago. The conversation happened during COVID lockdown. Darren is such an interesting artist, an interesting person. He's very engaged and active. He produces a lot of paintings. He's all over social media with interesting content. He travels around the country with his painting to do art shows. And he also does martial arts. He is just someone who is very engaged with the world, and his artwork reflects that. I was very grateful that he spoke to me, and I hope you enjoy my conversation with Chicago-based painter, artist, Darren Jones. Darren, welcome to Eager to Know. I'm very excited to talk to you. We did a brief conversation yesterday where I'm doing this project where I'm talking to artists who are sheltering in place and working, and they're reviewing their work. And you started talking about some background of it, inspiration about some of your work. And I was very excited. And I realized that we've never actually had a creative conversation. I've come to your studio, but we kind of talked business, and we never really talked about the creative aspects of your art. And I realized that like mid our conversation, and I'm thinking I need to have him on the podcast so we can have that conversation. So welcome. I'm glad that you're here.
Cool. I'm glad to be here. And that short little segment was kind of fun. And it's funny, sometimes you end up telling your story and your inspirations so often at art shows and everything like that it's a little second nature, and it's kind of fun, like you said, when you get somebody who realizes they've never heard it before, and it intrigues them and wants to know more. And it's really cool. So, but I'm glad to be here. And as you can see, sheltered in my studio, if you're watching this on the video.
Your studio looks very cool. It is very cool because I've been there. I have studio envy for sure.
I get a lot of my artist friends, I say that I'm really fortunate. I've lucked out. I've been in this space now 5 going on to my 6th year. It's my own space. I used to share a studio with another artist for about 7 years, and moving into my own space was kind of life-changing as an artist. It really changed my direction and where I'm at, and it's inspired new works. But it sometimes can be lonely.
I want to know a little bit about how you got into being an artist. Did you do something before you were an artist?
Yeah, so I'm kind of one of those corporate stories. So I worked full-time corporately up until 2009. I was in a travel publication, moved to Chicago for a job 20 years ago, and worked full-time, and didn't start painting till it's probably been 15 years now that I started. And it's kind of a funny story. I was up in Evanston going to a movie, and the complex where it is, there's a Dick Blick art store right next door to it. And I saw a little starter oil kit in the window, and all I could think about during the entire movie was that kit. And I said to myself, if the store's open, go in and buy it. When the movie was over, sure enough, it was. I went in, I bought it, and I probably sat up till like 2 a.m. just painting on these little canvas boards that I bought, and haven't stopped since. So I was laid off in 2009, and I could have easily gotten another job, and I had the opportunity to say, let's do this full time, and haven't looked back. So
now, were you a artsy kid, or was that really the first time that your brain got turned on or activated to visual expression?
No, I was artistic, but I didn't really take any formal classes. In high school, I took, grade 9 and grade 10, I took art classes, and there's definitely an artistic gene in my family. My mother paints in watercolor. My grandfather was a sketch artist, and a couple cousins. So there's definitely that. And growing up, my mother and father were really wonderful at exposing me to the arts. So, we went to the ballet, we went to the symphony, we went to, I remember, I can't remember how old I was probably early teenager, but going to see, the Tutankhamun exhibit in Toronto. And so being exposed to it, I was well aware of it, but I just, I fought for years in like my early 20s or even, late teenage years of not knowing truly what I wanted to do. And so, and went to university. I have a degree in political science and a degree in business, and still fought it. And for some reason, there was something in my brain that thought I wanted to be an architect or an interior designer because I just loved the creativity side of sort of that. And it's when I started painting where I realized that was truly what I'm meant to be doing. And
Really?
yeah, so I'm very fortunate that I discovered my passion and early enough in life to create a career out of it and not just be a hobby.
Yeah, and also you don't have children, right? Right. So I mean, there's that other whole aspect of it that you are able to make a shift like that. You don't have a family to feed that you're supporting. A lot
Right,
of, my dad had 5 kids,
right,
and I know that he had a passion for photography, but it wasn't really something that he could do because he had a family.
right,
So it sounds like you're very lucky. Um, possibly that's one way to look at it.
right.
Yesterday, you were talking about different pieces of art, and you were describing how experiences in the world inspired you to go into the studio and sit in front of a canvas and create something. So you're making a connection between the outside world, and then it's being rerouted through Darren's brain, and it's coming out of you onto the canvas. That is a very interesting, exciting, amazing process. What do you think, was that happening before you learned how to paint? Were you absorbing the world and it was being expressed some other manner? Or was that just not happening before you found that paint set in Evanston?
You know, I I think it's always been in there. Another thing I can thank my parents for is that we got to travel quite a bit growing up, and so I did get to see a lot more than just my hometown. And I think I expressed it early on with photography. So I was always fascinated about taking pictures whenever I traveled or wherever we went. I was inspired by something, but I never actually digested it and came back and said I need to do something from that trip. Whereas as I started to paint, that's where it truly started to just naturally come out with, so my very, very first series, once I, stopped experimenting, and I mean, I always still experiment, but just playing around, and I was trying to come up with an idea of what I wanted to paint. And I started off in a floral series, and it was all inspired by my mom's gardens that we grew up with. So the irises and sort of all of that. So I was automatically, initially when I started painting, taking something from outside, like you said, stirring it into this crazy brain and then putting it onto a canvas. So, looking back, I might have done that subconsciously before I started painting, but it's truly come out with my artwork.
It sounds like you are a lucky person because you have this available to you for the rest of your life. And that's something that is never going to, you're never going to finish it or reach the end. Like
No,
it is something that you have available to you for whether you travel to Europe or
right,
whether you take a walk down the street outside your house. You always have the ability to absorb, process, and recreate it and express it in a way that you can share with the rest of the world. That's kind of a combination of the world and
right.
Darren.
Yep. Yeah, it is. It is. And, I've not really thought of it that way. And I don't think anyone's physically said that out loud sort of to me, but you're right. I'm truly lucky that I have that ability. And like you said, it'll never stop. And that's one thing with my work as well, is that it always evolves. I haven't been doing the same collection for the 15 years that I've been painting. I've always keep evolving. And I think that's because exactly that. I see something that inspires me and I try to come up with my version of that on a canvas or on a panel. And like you said, it'll continue till I'm done.
Now, are you limited by inspiration or are you limited by time? Meaning, do you have more things that you want to paint, but you only have so many hours in the day? Or do sometimes you run out of inspiration, run out of new projects?
Sometimes it's a little combination of both. You kind of, for me, there's a business side to being an artist and doing so many art shows. I do a lot of the outdoor art shows as well, indoors and openings and showings. And so I have to have a certain amount of inventory in a year for me to be able to show all these. So there are times where I am crazy busy and, the brain's ready to explode. And then there's the quieter times where almost can have more fun because I'm not, constrained to, oh, I have a show this weekend, I need to finish these two pieces. I'm, like this time right now, I'm working on a commission for a client, but otherwise I know I'm going to just start creating something caused by what's going on in the world right now. So I might not be traveling, but what's going on outside is definitely affecting me inside. So, there's the times like that, but then also there's times where you're just not creative. Your brain's tired. And those are the days I'll come into the studio, I'll start on something and it just fights me. And so I stop because I know it's not going to go anywhere. And I'll do prep work, or I'll do, underlying layers, or I'll start doing marketing, or I'll go home, so it's kind of a little combination of both of those. So, I could spend all day here and still find something to do.
You mentioned the art shows, and I think the art show scene in Chicago, is that a unique scene? Because I remember when I was moving from Boston to Chicago, people telling me that the art fair scene is a big thing in Chicago. Many people told me this. And then I came here, and every weekend there's all of these art fairs, and we don't have that in Boston. So I wasn't sure if that, and I know that's a big part of how you get exposure, I believe, to people.
It's kind of funny, the outdoor art fair scene. There's a pull. A give and take sort of with it. There's so many artists who don't want anything to do with them. They
Yep.
prefer to sell on their own, online, through galleries, or through doing gallery openings. I'm a combination of both. I do galleries, I do indoor openings, I do indoor shows, but then I do the outdoor shows. I'm doing less now than I've done before, but in my early parts of the career, I wouldn't change it because it opens the door to meeting so many fascinating people, both client and artist based. And it's a lot of work, a lot more work than people think it is, because you're dealing with outdoor elements, you're setting up a tent and walls, and you're creating your own show. But in Chicago, it is unique in the sense that there are outdoor art fairs all around North America in all the cities. Everyone has one. But if you look at Chicago, like you said, there's one almost every weekend in the summer. And that's because there are a couple art promoters here who capitalize on Chicago, but also the suburbs. And there's definitely something that, and back in the day, I used to do most of them, and I changed my model, and I only do 2 local shows a year now, aside from my open house in the studio. And I travel the country more, and it's been more successful because what you're doing is you're hitting those cities like Boston, or I go up to Madison, Wisconsin, I do a show, or I go to Aspen, Colorado and do a show. That's their only show for a year. So everyone comes out and they're looking for art, whether it's a sculpture, jewelry, painting, photography. Whereas here in Chicago, because there's so many, I would get people going, oh, what's your next show? When will we see you next? And they would follow you all summer. And then eventually maybe it would lead to something down the road. So it is unique here in the sense that there are so many. And it's a good thing for certain artists. As a painter, I don't think, because I'm established now in the Chicago market, I don't need to do every show in Chicago. I pick 1 or 2 that are the big ones.
Yep.
And focus elsewhere.
Is that a unique experience for an artist to be you, your painting, and your audience all together regularly every weekend? Most artists probably don't have that situation. Most artists, either they're selling online, so they're not physically with the person observing the art. They are selling through a gallery, so they're there for the opening and
Right.
maybe not much else. You know what I mean? Like you're in this regular combination of you with the art and people.
It's I think it's kind of it's good for the brain. I paint alone. I'm in my studio alone. So 5 days a week or 7 days a week, especially when I'm not doing a show, I'm here by myself. I'm talking to my paintings, I'm texting other friends to get advice or talk or whatever. But doing these shows, it puts you, like you said, right there. You're there. You're the one responsible for selling your work.
Yeah.
But people want to know the artist, and they want to know my story, and they want to learn, like this piece behind me. They want to know what's going on, what's this, how did you create it, what inspired you. And I've made so many personal connections with people with my art, and had a gallery sold that piece to the same people, I would have never learned the story about what moved them, what made them buy my piece because they were moved by it, and what their story was connected to my story. So it's really a cool experience. And that's why, I have a couple artist friends who swear they won't ever do the outdoor shows. And even as I, grow my business, my brand of who I am as an artist, I will always still have a handful of those because of the people I've met, and I would have never met them had I not done those shows. And I consider some of my good clients friends because of that.
Yeah.
They bought from me at one show, but now they come back every year to say hi and just tell me how much they love the painting and invite me to dinner, or tell me that they're sending their friends. And so it's a really heartwarming experience, aside from the crazy work that you have to do to be in those
Yeah.
shows.
Yeah. No, that sounds wonderful to me. I know that is not an experience that a lot of people would want to do. I
No.
think a lot of creative people, they just want to create. They just want to be in the studio with their canvas and their paint and their palette. And then they don't want to deal with the whole sales and marketing, or they don't really want to deal with people.
Right.
I know
Well,
you're an extrovert like I am. So that part of it, and seeing the artwork where its home is, like that means a lot to me, and that obviously
absolutely.
means a lot to you.
Absolutely.
It's like your baby type thing.
Yeah, I mean they are my kids, and I always joke with anyone who buys. I always ask them to email me a photo if I'm not installing it for them. That if they live somewhere outside of the area and take it home, I always ask them to send me a picture of where my kid is in his forever home. And and most people understand that as well, that they're buying a piece of me. It's not just something that was mass produced. And it's a really cool thing. And like you said, being extrovert, I'm really not extroverted. I think I'm a little of both, because I think I'm a social introvert. And it took me years and years to really learn how to connect with people and talk to people when you're doing these shows. Because the first couple of years, I was way intimidated and couldn't understand why my paintings weren't selling themselves, and didn't want to talk to people. And finally learned that in order to sell, you need to connect, and you have to talk.
Yeah, and
So
somebody has to. I mean, it could be a gallery. If it's being sold through a gallery, that's the role of the gallery, is to establish a relationship with the
absolutely.
collector, and to establish a relationship between the artist slash artwork with the collector. And
Exactly.
you're just doing it directly.
Yeah, I'm doing it directly, and I'm represented by a few galleries as well, and they do it for me, and I love them. And would I like to have more? Probably. And I think it's, for me, I have a balance of sort of a little bit of everything to try to get my work out there. And I don't think I would ever want to be the artist who doesn't connect and be a part of that process at some point. I don't want to be the guy who just paints in the studio and waits for a check to come in. I know I need to be out there to meet these people, and the collectors, and it adds to my experience as well as an artist.
Yep. Your transition from a corporate guy to a full-time artist is that's something that a lot of people wish that they could do, that they dream that they could do. and you did it. What do you say to people that are thinking about doing that? We're in a situation right now, we're in the middle of like this coronavirus situation, and people are home, and people are probably thinking about what is really important and looking at their job, and maybe they've lost their job. And this period is probably a time where people are going to be reassessing what's important to them. In the spirit of that transition that you made that was successful, what would you say to people, and based on your experience?
I actually tell a lot of, this is another thing that goes back to some of the art shows. I meet so many people who are doing their job and are creative on the side and are like, oh, I wish I could do this. And I'm like, do it, and start off by doing it on the side. So when I was in the corporate world for probably about 3 years, I was painting before I was laid off and jumped into doing this full time. So I would do maybe one show a year because that's all I could do I would work 9 to 5 downtown. I'd come up to the studio for 3-4 hours or till midnight, weekends. And, when I had the opportunity, when, I was laid off, the initial thought wasn't, okay, I have to be an artist full time. It went through my head, but at the other time was, I'm like, what am I going to do to survive? And I actually remember sitting on the curb downtown in front of the high rise that I worked in with my box of stuff. And the little voice said, this is your time to do it. And that first year was scary. I was responsible for my income. I was responsible for my bills, my healthcare. Like I had, at that time I was sharing a studio. So I was responsible for my half of that. And it forces you to realize that it's not a hobby, it's a business. And if you want it to be a business, you need to think that way at some point. And so for someone who's sitting at home who really has a passion to be a photographer or really has a passion to paint, then, if they can take the leap, I just say take it. It's a struggle and it's scary for the first while, but at the same time, in the end, if it's truly who you are, it's worth that effort. And I think I needed to struggle a little bit to realize how important it is for me to be the reason I'm successful or not successful.
Yeah.
And I could have easily went home and sat on the couch and been bummed out for a couple months. And I decided, no, I'm meant to paint, and let's give this a try. And had the first year completely been a failure, who knows? I might have gone back to a full-time job and still painted on the side. But I went through probably 3 years of so many no's and, being turned down for this show and being turned down for this show and not being accepted for this. And it didn't stop me. I just kept going, knowing in my heart this was what I was meant to do. And if you believe in yourself, I really think you can do it.
A couple things I want to talk about that you just brought up. The first one is around when you're doing something that you're passionate about, and this is based on conversations that I've had on my podcast. This is something that keeps coming up. Even if you're doing something that you are passionate about and is creative, like photography or painting or being a personal trainer, there's always a huge part of it that is the business part. And
Absolutely.
whether you like it or not, you have to do that. And at some point, that part that you're passionate about is only a little sliver of what you're doing, unfortunately. I mean, there's all this other stuff that you're going to have to deal with: the marketing, the sales, the finances, blah, 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 blah. And then you got the painting. So I just wanted to highlight that, because that's, people that are listening, that's a really important part of it. People shouldn't think that if you become an artist, that literally that is 100% of your life is
Right.
painting. It just isn't.
No.
And it isn't, even if you are someone, the guy who owns Tesla, whatever his name is, like that guy's dealing with all kinds of nonsense constantly. And like the exhilaration of celebrating a car is a tiny part of what he does. He's putting up with bullshit all the time. And so I think that's an important aspect of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely the business side. Like you have to, I tell this to so many people who are only part-time artists who have a full-time job and just sort of do it on the side. And, they ask me the advice is so many people, you have to think, all right, like what is my business model for this year? Like how many shows am I doing? What are my costs going to be? You have to factor in, where you're traveling to. Are you going to travel this year? You've got all your bills for the studio coming in. Be lucky. I'm fortunate. I have a great space here. I don't paint from home. And for me, that's a huge part of me knowing that my art is a business. It is separate from my home life. I come to the studio to work, and I don't call my painting work in my head. I paint, but it's my work. And so I can separate sort of those two, and that helps you psychologically knowing that I have to support this studio space somehow. So that's where the business side comes in. And, as a painter, it'd be wonderful if I could just sit here and paint 10 hours a day, every day, and everything just sells itself. But that's not how it works,
Yep.
especially in today's world.
So the other thing that you brought up that I wanted to expand on is the idea of getting, I wouldn't call it rejection, but not getting affirmation. You mentioned that the first year you were painting and you weren't accepted to shows. I don't necessarily think of that as a rejection, but it's definitely not a process of I'm creating, I put something out in the world and everyone accepts it and celebrates it.
Right.
So
Right.
you're not getting that. So that's something that you also have to be comfortable with and be able to, so tell me about that and why you think that's important to people.
Well, I think it's really a challenge because you're putting, as a painter, I'm putting myself on the canvas. These two pieces behind me I'm working on, they could take 2 weeks, they could take 6 months for me to work on it. And that's all my effort. That it's me, it's my passion, it's my blood, sweat, and tears that go on those panels. So when it comes to selling it or showing it, you're selling yourself. It's your soul, it's your heart, it's your passion that you're selling. So when you're told no, or you're not accepted for a show, or you start to question yourself, which is never, it's a dark hole you can go into, but you need to avoid it. But the one beautiful thing I have learned in all these years is that people, for the most part, are incredibly respectful to you as an artist, that they won't come in to your studio or your booth or your show, and if they don't like your work, they'll tell that to their friends. They won't tell it to you. They'll be like, well, that's interesting. I can see your concept, but I'm not understanding it, and walk away.
Yep.
They're not gonna walk up and go, oh, what were you thinking? Like, this is awful, and I can count on my one hand people who have actually said that at a show, and that's it. In the 14 plus years.
Said disrespectful things to you?
Yeah, I mean, I had this one crazy little old lady at this one show, and she literally walked into my booth and she raised her hands and she's like, "You call this art? This is art?" And off she goes. And it was actually a really cool moment because, of course, she was loud and a lot of people were around. And I'm very sensitive, and of course I could feel myself tearing up a little bit but then there was this other woman with her family who were looking at my work, and she comes over to me and she grabs my arm and she goes, "Your work is beautiful." She goes, "I was in the booth next door and the woman's saying this to everybody in everybody's booth, so don't take it personally."
Okay.
And it was a really sweet moment because who cares if, what this crazy woman would say? She did still say it, but it was so nice to have someone counter it, and it makes you realize that it is you that they're insulting, and
Yeah.
people, for the most part, are respectful in that.
How do you deal with that idea though of you're presenting something to the world and people, some celebrate it, some reject it, even though people are mostly respectful, but it's possible that some people are not connecting, and it's a very vulnerable position to be in. And again, getting back to people that are listening or watching this and potentially considering going into art, that going into being a creative entrepreneur, that's something that they would have to deal with. Like, what do you say to them? What if you're a super sensitive soul?
You're going to have to grow a little bit of a hard shell. You have to. I mean, it's, you know, I've been doing this now 14 plus years. I still get terrified when I show a new collection of work. I get almost sick to my stomach when I'm showing some new pieces that no one has ever seen before, that is a new evolution of something I've been working on that I'm incredibly proud of, but have no idea how the world's going to react to it. And you know, it can be terrifying, but you've got to fight through that and know that there's a person for every kind of style of painting, and you're not going to be liked by everybody. And I'm an abstract landscape artist. You know, most of my work is completely abstract, and I know there's a huge percentage that has no interest in my art. But it's really cool when you find someone who has never liked that style who falls in love with your work, and that's a really cool thing when that happens. So you've got to it's tough when you're a super sensitive person that you take it all personally, and you will, but you've got to fight that as well, because, you know, like I said, not everyone's going to like your work, but for the most part they're not going to tell you
Yeah. How does martial arts fit into this for you?
that. So yeah, this the leading on to starting a whole new collection to be terrified to show people. So I started I've been doing Muay Thai kickboxing for a little over 2 years, and really fell in love with that, and was really kind of doing it as a workout. And Jason, my instructor, really
Jason Bender, who has also been on the podcast, and thank you very much for introducing me to him. He was an awesome guest.
You're welcome. He is awesome. He's changed my life. He really has. And Bender Martial Arts is where he's going with, and you know, he's trying to follow his dream as a martial art instructor. And he convinced me to come out and try jiu-jitsu. And I was terrified. It's kind of like showing a new collection. I had no idea what I was getting myself into, and I'm addicted to it. And it's a really cool sport. It's not for everybody. And what's been really fascinating to me is that it's caused a new collection of art for me. And what I've done is, I'm calling it right now The Art of Sport, if you're on my website. And all these pieces are inspired by either a technique I've learned or a training session I've had with Jason or with the class itself. And I've taken what I'm learning and what the actual sport is itself. And, you know, to give it sort of quick terms, is that if you see two black belts doing jiu-jitsu, it's a form of art in itself. It's elegant and it's smooth, and it can be violent, but at the same time, there's just so much that they do, where for me as a white belt, I'll never know enough, because there's just so much you learn. It's so complicated. It tests not only your endurance, but your brain and your passion for not giving up and fighting for it. Because I can have a great week on the mats, and then the next week I don't remember anything, and I feel like a failure with it, and I just keep going and persevere. And so with these paintings, I started with the first one, and underneath the painting there's anywhere from 60 to 80 layers that go on, and it's chaotic.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's chaotic, and it's motion, and it's colorful, and it's crazy, and it's not only just colors, but there's textures and layers. And then I do a whole fiber process, which I do on my birch work or tree work that I do. And then I whitewash the entire piece. So standing back, there's a soft elegance to the piece. And as you get closer, you see the movement in the texture. You see a lot of the underlying colors come through. And that's kind of how I feel with the sport. And the cool part with a lot of them, with the texture, I actually layer on, before I start the color work, I do a plaster material. And I actually stand in front of the canvas, and had I learned some new technique, I actually do the hand movements with it and my body movements. So that's where a lot of it sort of comes through. And so I'm now into the 9th piece, I think, in the collection. And it's been fascinating. And who knew something like that would inspire artwork, but it has. And it was like I was saying, I showed them for the first time at my studio open house, and had no idea what the reception was going to be, and everybody just fell in love with them.
Nice.
And they thought they were beautiful, but once they heard my story, they fell in love with them even more. And a cool quick side story to these. So I sold two of them to this wonderful woman in Minneapolis area, and um, she's a brain specialist and a good friend of mine who's also a client. She brought a group of women to the studio, and she was actually coming for one of my One Can Dream staple pieces. She had already researched on my website, and so we came in and we opened wine and we were having these great conversations. And I started telling the whole jiu-jitsu story. And the two pieces that I have a sort of living area set up in the front of the studio, and the two pieces were very opposite. One was the whitewashed with really a lot of movement and flow, and the other was very grid-like, and I had done all the pattern with my fingers, and so it was very structured. And when I was explaining them to her, it was how both sides of my brain work with the sport, is how you need to be structured and it's formal and there's all these rules and techniques, and that's where the sort of the structure side is. But this side is what my brain's thinking when I'm actually in the midst of actually, grappling and sparring. And she just fell in love with the fact that these two pieces involved my brain, and she's a brain specialist, and she fell in love with them. And she went home and basically called me like the next day and bought the two pieces. And
Right.
so it was really cool. And I get excited telling people about this because it's something I would have never known at my age, jumping into a martial art, thinking it would create a new collection for me.
Yeah, that's incredible that you took your experience in jujitsu and you used your artwork to connect that experience with a brain specialist. I
Yeah.
mean, that is what art is all about.
That's the full circle of how this works. And the best part is, so the friend who I just love this woman to death, who brought this group of women here, she found me at an outdoor art show, and she bought from me then. And because of that, 4 years later, this woman's in my studio. And that's where it's hard to tell people, like, you might not sell something at this show, but if you stay connected and keep plugging along, something might happen. And that's the perfect example of that.
So from our conversation, I really feel like what you are all about is you're someone who embraces the world, and then you use your art for you to connect with other people, all of your experiences.
I guess pretty much. I've sort of not thought of it that way, but that would probably be a great way to describe it.
Well, Darren, thank you very much. This has been incredible. Is there anything else that you want to talk about? Anything upcoming that you want to share?
Well, unfortunately, due to the worldwide pandemic, all the art shows that I currently were scheduled on are slowly all canceling. So I'm working away. I'm following all the social distancing and quarantine guidelines, but I'm here in the studio alone. I'm very fortunate. There's nobody in this building, so I can come and go without seeing a single human. So I'm in here creating, and I haven't started what my new collection will be based on what's going on in the world, but I'm going to start. And I think this is how we connected in the little segment that we did, was I've been spending these last 4 weeks highlighting all my artist friends and peeps that on my social media. And so I think you're going to start seeing a lot more virtual studio tours. I thought of today when I came in the studio that I think next week I'm going to come in and hang all the work that I have created and do a little 10-minute, art show. And so I'm here. My art's available. I can do, touch-free deliveries and all that. But I think the most important thing is to support fellow artists who really, like me, do this full time and try to make the world beautiful, and not getting a lot of support from anywhere else. That, for us to survive, supporting the arts is a really cool thing right now.
Okay. And where can people get in touch with you and see your artwork online? Where do they start?
So where to start? My website obviously is a great starting point. So that's darrencjones.com. So DarrenCjones.com. Then I'm Darren Jones Art on Instagram and Darren Jones on Facebook. And I do a ton of social media. So if you want to follow me, my Instagram's really fun usually. So if you want to follow that, that's great. And then you can email me, darrenjonesart@hotmail.com. And I have a client actually I just emailed today that hopefully I'm going to do a virtual showing of a couple pieces that they're interested in. And so there's lots of ways around figuring this out during this time to get you to see some art and have fun with it.
Okay, great. And Darren is located in Chicago, and your studio is in the Ravenswood, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Ravenswood neighborhood of Chicago.
Right.
All right. Well, Darren, thank you so much. This was awesome to get to know you even better.
Absolutely. I really appreciate it.
My name is Ricky McGuckran, and you have been listening to Eager to Know, the podcast. If you haven't already, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join me next week for another Eager to Know podcast.